So we continue our exploration on this very lengthy section on misdeeds in the Exalted Treatise on the response of the Tao. And essentially it's a list of all the things that we should avoid, whether it's mental states, words, or deeds. Now, the first few sentences that we will focus on, you can see, of course, that actually they are related. In the first part of both sentences, it talks about the need or the neglect of something that we should care about, that we should be concerned about, whether it's the right or our relatives. And the reason why we neglect this is because of the next part of the sentence, which is that we focus on what is inappropriate or wrong. So let's look at the very first misdeed, which is to abandon the right and learn the wrong. The key words here are, of course, right and wrong. And so at the bottom, I've bolded this, the Chinese characters, and their more literal translation in English. So it's talking about abandoning something that we should accord or comply with, and to follow or learn something that is contrary, that is actually a violation of the norms. But of course, this explanation still doesn't allow us to fully understand what it means, does it? What's right and what's wrong. In the collected commentaries, it points to a literary allusion, an allusion to a story that takes us right back to ancient China. So this story is from 720 BCE, and this is what the ancient or early China looked like. It's sort of divided into various feudal domains, all sort of pledging their allegiance in various degrees to the head of the Zhou court. But our story focuses on the state of Wei, and at that time it was Duke Zhuang of Wei. This story is actually about his family. So Duke Zhuang had several sons, so several children, and one of the sons, his name's Zhou Xu, was particularly favoured. You could say that the Duke spoiled him. And what happens is that this starts to become problematic because this son, as he grows up, shows sort of a cruel and ruthless streak. He enjoys playing with weapons. And you can imagine the sort of harm that he inflicts on the people around him. So this is a problem. Now, it's not just a family problem, it actually becomes a political problem. And it has political implications because who the Duke favours is who is in line to next for the leadership. So it has implications really for the rest of society. And as a result, ministers step in to try to advise and counsel this Duke, to try to, think again about who he favours. One of these ministers, or the minister that is recorded in the classic text, is named Shi Que. And his particular counsel has gone down in the history books in the sense of providing, you could say, the principles of ancient Chinese education. So let's explore what he says. He tries to tell the Duke, I've heard that if one loves their child, then as a parent, you have to teach him the ways of duty and not allow him to stray, to get off track. So this teaching is not just allowing or enabling the child to have some sort of formal education or ensuring that he has a tutor. It's about something that begins right from the moment that they are born. And this teaching is not just in lectures or classes, but it's the teaching that occurs through the actions, through the actions, words of the people around the child, particularly, say, for example, parents and carers. It's what we call family education. So this kind of teaching is very important because it's not just about skills and knowledge, but it's actually about developing that child's character, ensuring that they are able to develop themselves along the lines of honesty, respect, being able to fulfill their duties in life on a personal and professional level later in life. So this is the form of teaching that Shi Qu is talking about. And he sort of starts off by saying, well, this is not my own opinion. This is something that is sort of ancient wisdom. It's something like, a common saying that this is the duty of a parent. He goes on further to highlight sort of traits of character that he's quite worried about. He talks about pride, flaunting, excess, and dissipation. So pride is this, according to the commentary, is this idea of, being overly confident with your own opinions, so much so that you impose it on others, and to the extent that you bully others because you want to get your way. So that's pride. Flaunting is, being very proud, but also very conceited in what you have. So your assets, your abilities, and sort of, to the detriment and to the harm of others. Excess, as it said, as you can imagine, it's having a lifestyle. Your consumption, your lifestyle is, you do things to excess. Say, for example, you really should sleep at quite a, 10 o'clock at night, but actually you do an all-nighter. People have one mobile phone, you have 4. Why? Because you can. So this kind of thing is sort of this excess lifestyle. And then the idea of dissipation, which is that you are lazy in improving yourself, and you're lazy in helping others, sort of cultivating this goodness. Your lifestyle is such that you might lose yourself in entertainment and indulgence all day. So you're not really leading a very productive life. So all of these are kind of character traits. And Shi Qu is trying to explain that perhaps this is what he's seeing in Zhou Xu. And in fact, these are the very sources of a person going off track. Now, how do they come about? He says, well, these 4, origins of deviance come about when this person has been particularly favored and rewarded, encouraging this child, this son, in the wrong ways. He shouldn't be doing this, but yet you're rewarding him for it, and you're, personally favoring him for it and making sure that everyone knows about it. So he's sort of drawing attention to these traits so that the Duke can recognize it in his own son and realize that actually he is the cause of his son's sort of deviance, you could say. But he also then goes on to say, what he should be doing and what he really isn't. It's not just the traits, but you can see it in his actions. So he continues by talking about the so-called 6 violations, the things that you shouldn't do. First is in relation to the lowly hindering the honored. Now, this is in relation to someone's position. So if they're in a more senior position, then they should be respected. The young insulting the old, because this is in relation to age. Distant coming between kin, so in relation to family ties. New coming between those with old ties, so more established friendships, more established connections should be treasured and valued over newer ones. Those with fewer resources, trying to bully those who have more resources, who have more. And then finally, the idea that those who aren't doing their duty are hindering and even harming those who are diligent and dutiful in their work and in their character. So basically, when you look at this list of 6, you can see that those who are honoured in more senior positions, who are more elderly or older, those who are closer in familial ties, your more established relationships, people who have greater resources, and those who are of good character. These are the people that we should be respectful of, and we should really value their opinions. So clearly, of course, perhaps you can imagine that Zhou Xu, this really spoiled son, may be doing all of these things in the sense that he's younger, but he tries to, insult those who are older. He is of a lowly position. He's just the prince, and yet he's trying to, use some sort of authority over those who are of more senior positions, etc. And he's able to do this because he has the backing and the favor of his father, which then gives him free rein to do whatever he likes. And people may feel that they cannot sort of discipline him or tell him, to put him in his place because they're afraid of the Duke. So this is, clearly a very sensitive topic. And Shi Jue is using this kind of established knowledge, this wisdom, to try to counsel and advise the Duke. So you can see also that those who are honoured, who are old, etc., they are in these positions of superior status for good reason. So these are, positions of greater responsibility, positions in which those roles are for those who are more experienced. In relation to this idea of the distant and those who are closer, we can think of a good example, which is the British royal family. So clearly those who are in the line of succession to the throne, these are the people who will be given more responsibilities. They have, more duties. And this is reflected in where they sit, where they stand, who they speak with, the functions they attend. So that's why that those who are closer are the ones to be respected and valued. Now, that's not to say that, everything that they say should, be completely followed without question. It's to say that they should be respected, and if there is something that you might question in terms of their ideas or authorities, you do so making sure that you have the evidence and provide that kind of feedback and advice with reverence. So that's what is probably not happening in this instance in terms of Zhou Xu, and Shi Jue sort of broaching the subject quite sensitively. Now, he then goes on to talk about what should be done, so the so-called 6 compliances. So it's no surprise that he's talking about the various roles. Rulers should be dutiful. That is a bit surprising because we think of rulers as being leaders, right? Who should they be dutiful to? Well, actually, they should be dutiful because they have to, make sure they're doing fulfilling all their tasks, their responsibilities, and more importantly, to be dutiful to the people, their state, their government. The subjects, so the subordinates, the ministers, and anyone who's below the level of the ruler should try to also fulfill their tasks, including people like Zhou Xu the son. Fathers should be kind. We often think of the line that parents should be compassionate, right? But this compassion doesn't mean that they say yes to everything their child wants. In fact, it's about being kind and compassionate and telling and instructing the child where they're wrong. I'm trying to help them improve on their weaknesses. So this kindness is not simply, smiling at them all the time, making sure that they're happy. It's, doing this with wisdom. Children, so sons here, should be filial. They should be caring and considerate towards their elders, towards their parents. Older siblings should show love towards the younger ones. Younger ones should be respectful towards the older ones. And therefore, this is called the 6 compliances. So For those of you who are familiar with Confucian learning, you can see that this refers to the 5 sort of foundational relationships in Confucian learning. It actually covers 3 of those relationships. So the relationship between ruler and subject, between parent and child, and between older and younger siblings. What's been left out is the relationship between friends and between partners. But there's a reason here, and it's because these particular roles relate to the Duke and his spoiled son. So Shi Que is trying to help the Duke understand, through the 6 compliances, through the 6 violations, these are the things that you have to be alert to. You have to, rein in your son and ensure that, if you are going to make him the successor, you have to really train him. You have to develop him. So clearly, you can see that this sort of family problem actually has broader implications. That Shi Que is not just advising the Duke of these various principles because he wants to meddle in family affairs, but because if the authority of the government, the ruling house, is eroded through this son wielding his authority over even the ministers, then the state is undermined. If these kinds of strategies, these policies are implemented because the son wants it to be implemented, then the people will be harmed and they may turn to other leaders, which means that ultimately the state itself may be prone and open to attack from neighbours, the neighbouring states. So it becomes quite important. And that's sort of the very crux of this ancient Chinese philosophy of why these relationships within the family are so important, because actually they have implications. So going back to the Exalted Treatise sentence, now we have a clearer idea of what's meant here by what's right and what's wrong. So what's right, what we should comply with, are these particular sort of moral duties in each of our roles and relationships. Obviously this is just a selection. We know that there are 5 fundamental relationships and the obligations associated with those roles. Things that we should avoid are sort of, a lack of order and respect in our interactions. And, whether it's lowly or honoured, young or old, these, gel quite well with our understanding of the 5 relations. So when we think of it from the perspective of Confucian learning, what's right and wrong, well, there are clear guidelines for us through the 5 sort of foundational relationships, human relationships. But very interestingly, these moral duties are not something that's imposed from the outside. It's not, something like the law, or, not something that someone invented. It's not something that Confucius invented, but actually it's something that is innate to us. So we read in the canonical works that actually the moral standards, yes, we read them in the text. They remind us actually of what is innate in our nature. What's right and wrong is something that we need to understand from, and we need to manifest these innate virtues inside, which are actually the true standard. So not only do we have the guidelines of the 5 relationships, but we also have the guidelines of the innate virtues. So you may have heard of the fact that in Confucian learning, humanity is the core virtue. But later on, Mencius also talked about humanity and rightness as sort of 2 fundamental virtues. Humanity being that idea of seeing others as oneself, showing compassion to others as oneself, and rightness being that idea of putting it into action at that particular time and place. So towards the right person, right time, right place, right action. So it makes it sort of specific to the circumstance, how to actually implement that humanity or compassion. There's also a kind of three-tiered virtue that has also been written about in the classics: humanity, wisdom, and courage. So yes, we may want to love others, we may want to be compassionate, but we have to do so with wisdom, just like a parent having to instruct their child, and not simply giving them what they want. With that wisdom, we also need to have the courage to do so, to put it into practice. Mencius also talked about 4 innate virtues. So you have the humanity, rightness, wisdom, which we've talked about, and then on top of that, ritual propriety, which is, through our actions and our words, our attitude, showing respect and ensuring that there's harmony, with the people that we interact with. So there was the idea of 4 innate virtues. And finally, after the times of Mencius, another virtue was added, which was trustworthiness. Now, it's very interesting because you might say, okay, well, are there 3 or 2 or 4? Du Weiming, the scholar, has actually written a very good sort of analysis of this. That, yes, there are various, you could say, articulations of these innate virtues, but really they stem from one cardinal virtue, which is humanity. And all the others, in their various names and forms, are really just dimensions of humanity, in particular sort of settings or different sort of mind frames. But it's really a manifestation of this humanity. So, someone didn't just make up the virtue of trustworthiness and add it to the list. This is something that people thought, one's humanity was manifested in this way in certain situations. And that's why we have this idea of 5 constant virtues. But at the very core of it is this idea of humanity, this innate virtue of humanity. Now, what is humanity? Because if this is the cardinal virtue, then by according with humanity, then that is right. And if we don't accord with humanity, then that is wrong, or to be contrary to what is right. And Confucius in the Analects explored and discussed this topic again and again with his students. One student, Zigong, was a wealthy merchant. He was someone who was also a very keen student. And he's trying to understand, this core virtue, this virtue that his teacher Confucius has emphasized. And one day he asks Confucius, what if I was to, spread my wealth and make sure that everyone, across all of the states of China, are able to, live sufficiently without any want? Would this be considered humanity? And Confucius replies very, very directly, that's not. You've got it wrong. You're thinking about it in the wrong way. You're making it sound too difficult, when actually it's quite simple. It's nothing to do with, the outward appearance of money or wealth. It's actually what's in your mind at any particular moment. And Confucius gives this particular answer in terms of what is humanity. He says, someone who is humane, so someone with this humanity, well, what they do is they wish to establish themselves. Now, this establishing oneself is not one's career. It's not, one's connections. It's the idea of establishing and developing their character so that they can sort of bring out their innate virtues, because that is really the source of all good fortune. So, that's what they want to establish. They want to bring that out. And in doing so, having done that, they would also try to help others bring out their innate virtue, bring out their humanity. And on top of that, it's not just about putting that character, that virtue into practice. It's also about understanding what it is, how understanding, comprehending the world around us, the people around us. So someone who's humane, not only do they wish to actually live out this virtue, they also hope to be able to fully comprehend it and then help others to also fully comprehend it. It's sort of like, if you know how to ride a bike, but do you actually know the physics of how that balance works? So it's sort of another step. It's not the same as simply establishing your character. It's to then comprehend that. But the order here is also very important. You have to start with yourself first. So wishing to establish themselves, and then they establish others. There is sort of an order. But it's, as you can see, it's a dual concern for oneself and at the same time for others. And so Confucius then says, very simply, that the ability to take what is nearest is an analogy. So what's near is, me, my family, my relationships in my family, and you use that to help you understand how others feel, to use your, how you relate in your family to then extrapolate to more distant relations. And that is the method of humanity. That's how you get there. You start by working on yourself. If I'm, trying to develop and cultivate my virtue, how do I feel? What are the difficulties? What makes it? What gives me afflictions when I'm going through this process of cultivation? And then how can I help others go through that process? How can I then be sensitive to their feelings and their emotions? Now, it's always important to start from yourself in terms of how you're feeling, to think about how others might feel. But of course, not everyone thinks like you. And probably it's a good thing that not everyone thinks like me. But it's a good starting point. And you use that to reach out to others, to try to empathize with others. And when you do that, people will naturally respond in a way that will then help you understand more of how they feel. And then that sort of helps you learn about this process of seeing others as oneself, this idea of humanity. So that's why it's so important to start from yourself in terms of, okay, how can I sort of uncover my virtue and then help others to do the same. If we are able to do that in every moment, then that is humanity. To think about uncovering virtue, humanity, rightness, etc. Then at the same time, this dual concern for others, to help others, then that is right. So the so-called abandoning the right, or the right, is humanity, our innate virtues. And to learn from the wrong is anything that is not related to humanity, when we're thinking about ourselves rather than others. And interestingly, you'll realize that there's really no middle ground. You're either doing one or the other. So if you sort of grasp onto this virtue, or grasp onto these ideas, these mental states of wanting to help others, thinking of others, then you'll be focused on what you should accord with, and naturally the what is contrary will not be your focus. So it's just a matter of understanding what to focus on in every moment. And this naturally leads to the next line, which is this misdeed of spurning relatives and following acquaintances. So to really, neglect or even oppose and challenge those who are close to you, and side with, or support with your resources those who are more distant. Now, who's close and who's distant, obviously, is relative. So it's not necessarily relatives and acquaintances. For example, you could be neglecting your parents, and in fact, supporting your partner, for example. Now, when you have a marital relationship and you form a family, then your focus is on that, your family. But at the same time, your priority, or you should never neglect the needs of your parents. You should make that a priority before, for example, going on a family holiday with your partner and your children. You should make sure that your parents are well looked after, that their needs, not only physical but emotionally, are met before you then go and enjoy time with your partner. So that's what it means. So there's that idea of perhaps giving priority to your partner over your family or your parents, giving priority to your partner's family over and above your own, your side of the family, or it could even be sort of supporting more distant relatives and neglecting closer sort of kinship ties. There's another sort of example would be simply, siding with friends over your own family. So all of these would be examples of this kind of misconduct. Now, the question is, why would you do this? Why is it that you would neglect those who are close to you, who perhaps known you for the longer period of time in your life, have looked after you for longer, your own family members, your siblings, your parents, and go off and be caring and considerate to a new friend, for example? Why would you do that? Well, clearly it's because there are perhaps short-term interests. You feel that perhaps there's more to gain from your new relationship, or maybe they're just easier to get along with, and therefore it's a happier relationship and you want to invest more time and resources in that relationship. But why is it that we shouldn't neglect those who are close to us? Of course, short-term gains, easier getting along with your friends, those are all good things, but why is it that we shouldn't neglect those who are close to us, our family members? Well, the reality is that these are the people who've known us the longest, and these are the people who really know us, our strengths, our weaknesses, things that we have to really improve on, areas, blind spots that we have. They know us and they know what we need to know. And their advice, perhaps, they don't mince their words. They don't try to make us happy. They just tell us and caution us about what it is that we need to be careful. Any dangers ahead in our career, etc. Or our health, for example. They tell us the inconvenient truths of our lifestyle. So their advice, that relationship should never be neglected, because they are the source of understanding your own blind spots and your own weaknesses. That's one reason. A deeper reason comes from the classic of family reverence. There's this line which says that those who do not love their parents but love others, so as we mentioned, friends, your partner, your partner's family, that's called being contrary to virtue. Those who don't respect or revere their parents, but then go off and revere others, well, that's being called contrary to ritual propriety. And notice here that this classic, this Confucian classic, doesn't tell you that if you don't love your parents, it's being contrary to your parents or contrary to the parent and child relationship. It doesn't say that if you don't respect your parents, it's being contrary, or you're violating or you're offending your parents. It talks about being contrary to your own virtue, contrary to your own cultivation of ritual propriety. So these are the virtues that are innate in us. Sort of the source, as I said before, the source of all good fortune, health, wealth, etc. And in order to unlock this, we really have to cultivate through our relationships the most important one being that of our family relationships, the parent and child relationship. So if we don't fulfill this relationship, if we don't do this, if we love others but not our parents, or over and above our parents, then actually it hinders the development of our own virtue. Perhaps our parents will always love us, no matter what we do to them. Perhaps they're not offended, but actually it harms ourselves. It harms our very own humanity. And that is the real harm. So it's not just misdeed, because the Exalted Treatise says so, because, our parents provide us with good support and advice. But actually, if we don't do this, then it harms our very own cultivation, our own virtue, and ultimately the ability to unlock the innate nature inside of us, the wisdom, humanity that is there. So that is the real harm. And that is why it is listed here as a misdeed, something that we should avoid. So that's this idea of, very much related to the earlier sentence about, not following what we should comply with. So not following the right, but in fact following the wrong. So this is, you could say, an example of that. If we neglect what is right, neglect our relatives, our parents, and then sort of support distant relations, then that's an example of neglecting the right and following the wrong. Okay, so the next sentence then I'd like to explore is, beyond our relationships in the human realm, but asking heaven and earth to witness our cruel thoughts, our mean thoughts. So these are obviously, mental states that we shouldn't have. And then calling on spirits to examine our base deeds. Now, the photo here on the left is very commonly found in Asian communities. And generally you'll find that they have this kind of altar in their house, in which there are statues of the Buddha, Bodhisattva, other deities, but also pictures of ancestors, by which they make offerings, light incense, light candles, and worship towards. And I guess, these deities, these spirits, the Buddhas, the Bodhisattvas, our ancestors, are all there to remind us of what is right, what we should be following, their teachings, their instructions, their legacy. Now, this particular misdeed is, in fact, very serious because, first of all, as it says here, our thoughts, they're improper. And we know that. And on top of that, our actions are also improper, our base deeds. So these are both, things that we shouldn't be doing. And yet we use the name of these spirits, these deities that are actually there that to help remind us of our cultivation, that are there to remind everyone of what is, humanity, what is right, what is pure. And we use their name to try to witness, to try to verify that our thoughts are good, when in fact they are not. So it's a double demerit. It's a double negative because our thoughts and our deeds are already incorrect or improper. But then we ask these very pure and objective beings to try to verify in front of them that what we're doing is right, and that is clearly not the case. So we know, of course, from the earlier parts of the Exalted Treatise that there's this world that we live in is actually sort of governed by a bureaucracy of spirits who met out the requisite punishment or reward based on our own thoughts, words, and deeds. So a good analogy is in the world that we live in, the judicial system, the police, for example. The police don't come knocking on your door unless there's suspicion of some criminal activity. So it's actually sort of through our own actions that we bring it on ourselves, this whole system of this judicial system in the human realm. And it's the same in terms of the workings of the spirit realm, heaven and earth and the spirits, as it says here. So these spirits are impartial, they are objective, and their punishment or reward is based on our own conduct. So we need to be very clear about how to evaluate our own conduct, based on the guidelines that we talked about today and throughout the weeks in the Exalted Treatise, to use this to evaluate ourselves rather than sort of using the name of heaven and earth and spirits to try to, in front of others, perhaps verify and confirm that what we're doing is right. So that would be obviously a grave offence. I won't continue talking about that. We can move on to the next misdeed, which is the idea of giving and then feeling regretful. Now, I'm sure that everyone, myself included, we've all felt regret. And, there are so many decisions that we have to make in our lives. And perhaps after we've made some decisions, we reflect on the fact that perhaps we could have made a better decision. But this idea of giving, whether it's, giving wealth, time, energy, giving of our knowledge and our skills to help others, this kind of giving is actually a good thing. So why is it that we would feel regret? Well, that's the problem, isn't it? That's the misdeed, the thing that we should avoid. Giving is great, but then why feel regret? That's the negative part. So according to the collected commentaries, regret would often occur if your original intentions were not genuine. So what do I mean by this? Perhaps, at that time, everyone was making a donation and you just felt like you had to follow the crowd. Or perhaps, one of your colleagues or friends said, oh, you should do this too. And you felt forced. It wasn't something that you really wanted to do. You just did it because you didn't want to look bad. Right? So, and therein lies the answer, doesn't it? Your intention was not to give. You didn't want to. And so therefore, after you've given, you feel regret. You didn't want to. Maybe you wanted to save up for a holiday or something. So your intentions were not genuine. If your intentions were genuine, then it would be completely different, wouldn't it? I'm sure all of you have experienced this before. You see that people have this need. It's a good cause. It's it's a meaningful project, and you want to be able to support. So you're very generous, and you give, and you don't even remember. You're not thinking about some sort of reward or recognition afterwards. You just give, and you feel very good afterwards. So that's that idea. What genuine kind of giving is, and the other kind of giving, which is you don't really genuinely want to help. So that's cause for regret. But the reality is that you have given. And in the Buddhist teachings, it is through giving that we receive. So different forms of giving means that we experience different types of good fortune, health, wealth, or wisdom, for example. But how are the outcomes different? Let's say, you give and you regret versus giving happily. Okay? So if we give with difficulty, just like, this particular picture here, we're so annoyed with ourselves for giving, perhaps a few weeks afterwards, we're still thinking about it. Perhaps it was a really big donation and thinking, oh, why did we do this? Feel down in the dumps afterwards. If you give with difficulty, what happens? You have a difficult time receiving your good fortune. So you will receive good fortune, but along the way, you will encounter setbacks. People will give you a hard time. You'll experience internal angst, maybe. It might be problems. And you'll end up looking like this, not only when you're giving, but also when you're receiving. You'll have a hard time. But ultimately, because you've given, you will receive. It's just a matter of time. And the sort of path that you take to get there, let's say you own a business, and it's really difficult. You're perhaps running up in debt. Perhaps your employees are not cooperative, etc., etc. It's really difficult, but ultimately you succeed. So yes, you will gain, you will receive, but it's with difficulty. What's the opposite? The opposite is to give gladly. And you're, like I said, you genuinely want to help. You're very, it's not so much about the amount, it's about the mindset. So you really want to help this person. You're just giving it freely, happily, and you don't even think about it afterwards. What happens when you receive your good fortune is that you receive it with happiness, that it comes sort of naturally. You don't have to expend much effort. Let's say, again, going back to that example of the business, you open your shop and, there's so many customers, and just a matter of time, you have great employees, and the turnover is really great. It's really high turnovers, and you don't know where these clients come from, but it's very smooth. So that's the thing. You will get the same back, but the process is one of happiness, because that's how you were when you gave it, when you created that cause. So you can see that the cause is created in our minds. And let's say, for example, that you're a student now, so you might not have the means, say, to make these donations, but that's not the only thing that you can give. And giving is about the state of your mind. It's about giving within your means. Perhaps it's giving your time or energy. You simply need to have that kind of heart of giving. If you're not able to give at that particular time, maybe you support others or encourage others, and motivate yourself so that you can, in the future, give. So it becomes something that's motivating. You simply have to cultivate that mindset, that heart of giving. And of course, we know that everyone wants wealth, health, intelligence. But how it is that we receive this good fortune is something that not many people know. And it's not about scheming or necessarily, going to any particular course. It's actually understanding these basic underlying principles set out in the sage teachings to create our fortune. So how do we know what our future holds? Well, there's a really wonderful Chinese proverb. The future or the past is not something that we can walk and see. Apparently, this is a sign in South Australia. Not sure what happens when you walk to the left or right. But generally, it's not something you can see. But actually, this Chinese proverb explains how we might understand it. Okay, so the first part of the proverb says that if we want to understand the causes that we created in the past, all we need to do is look at our present conditions. So it could be, family relationships, our friendships, our workplace relations, the environment, the circumstances that we find ourselves in, our career. What's happening? Our circumstances now tell us exactly what we did in the past. And if we want to understand our future, if we want to know our future fortunes, then we have to look at our present actions. And this is very clear, because if we are giving, then it's a matter of time before we will receive. So this is not something that is a superstition. It is something that we actually see in our everyday lives. I'm sure we've all heard of the sort of child celebrity, someone who has achieved great success and fame and fortune early in their life. Well, that's because in their past life, they had created those causes. But what happens is that oftentimes this particular child star, they don't continue cultivating their good, their merits. So what happens? If you want to understand their future fortunes, look at their present actions. So if they're not cultivating, they're having this wasteful, excessive lifestyle, they're not, developing themselves in any way, well, what happens is later when they get older, in their older years, not only are they no longer famous, they're poor, but often destitute, and living sort of lives of great suffering. So that idea is, visible, manifest in, the world around us, the news, and even in, our family and friends. The question then is, when is the best time to attain good fortune and achieve our successes? Clearly, it's not when we're young. When we're young, when we have the mental and physical stamina to work hard and endure hardships, it's actually better to store up a good fortune, to continue to create good fortune and invest it for the future. When we're old, when we're physically, mentally less strong, and perhaps not able to withstand hardships, then that's the time when good fortune should manifest. So any time when we're still healthy, we should be giving. We should, create the causes. The causes are to perform good merits, these good deeds of our thoughts, words, and actions. And the best good deeds are to give. Now, it's not just wealth. It's also of our time, our energy for good causes, our ability to give others, help others learn and understand. And the best good fortune is actually to help them understand these sage teachings. That helps them develop and unlock that innate wisdom, because that is the source of all good fortune. So, if we have the health and the resources, we should invest that in creating more good deeds, in sort of creating more good causes. So these are the good deeds, so that in the future we can really enjoy it. So we give now in order to attain that good fortune later. But that is the best time. The best time is in our later senior years. And the good fortune manifests itself in terms of good health, a comfortable lifestyle, not having to worry about, where am I going to, where's my next meal coming from, where am I living, those sorts of worries, or even worries about one's health. And the next question I'd like you to reflect on is how it is that we achieve the greatest reward. Let's say, we're giving our time, our efforts, for example, our wealth towards, the best good deed, which is the idea of helping other people achieve their own innate virtue, establish themselves, comprehend this innate nature that they have. Well, through that giving, how can we achieve the greatest reward? Is it that we have to spend 24 hours on it? Is it that we have to use all of our resources in some way? Well, the answer is very simple. It's not to think of the reward. It's very paradoxical in a way, but the greatest reward is achieved when we actually don't think about the reward. We just focus our minds on the here and the now, and this humanity, the idea of developing ourselves, developing others, giving of ourselves, and ensuring that others are able to develop. These kinds of thoughts are the thoughts that we should be having, not the thoughts of how much am I going to get in return? What are the rewards if I help this particular person? It's when we think of the rewards that actually we limit our good fortune, because in order to maximize that good fortune, we do it without thinking of anything, and we continue doing it in each moment. So giving, so in that way, we will be able to give and then not feel any regret, because not only are we happy, but we also understand the underlying principle, which is that giving is not only good for ourselves, but also is not only good for others, but also good for our own virtue. And that's the greatest reward. So give and only think of this giving. And that is actually the greatest thing that you could possibly do for yourself. So I'll end on that note. We've covered quite a few lines today. We'll continue next week. Thank you very much for your attention.